right, so we start off in this chapter with a bit of a micro review. If you took micro here at HBU, you would have had this in chapter 2, Production Possibilities Frontier. There's a little bit of difference to it, and hopefully seeing it again now, you'll start to see some of the more applications to the topic of trade. But starting off here, we have something pretty close to what we would have learned, but it's worth looking at it, making sure you've got all this down. And so the book itself, the textbook, has, if you have the ebook access, actually you might actually have to have the Mind tab access, and that was not required. But if you do have it, you can actually do this graph builder yourself, which is nice because it actually takes you through the graph and you can maybe understand it a little bit better, whereas the way it's just printed in the book with all these lines and points and designations, it can get kind of confusing. So for that purpose, I was going to go ahead and put this video together for you, so you do have access to this nice graph builder idea. All right, so we start off with the basic scenario, much like we would have done in Intro Micro, where you have two countries making two products. You have the United States and these Production Possibilities Frontier. Just to remind you, this is obviously production, given the name. So what it means is, looking at the US graph, is the US can, with all their resources, all their labor, everything, max out wheat production at 60, or they could make 120 autos, but then they're making 0 wheat, right? So this is 0 autos, 60 wheat, 0 wheat, 120 autos, and then that is obviously the two extremes, but they have all these combinations they could do in the middle. So the only way they can make some autos is to give up some wheat. Hopefully this is starting to bring back some memories. And then the same thing over here for Canada. The numbers are just different. Their maximum production for wheat is 160, and their maximum production of autos is 80. So from there, they give us some more information here and remind us how to understand opportunity costs. That was the first thing we did with this. So if you focus on the United States, the way I always taught it was you could really look at these two extremes. You could say I'm doing 60 wheat, 0 auto, or 0 wheat, 120 auto. And so since this is a straight line, that means the trade-off is how many bushels of wheat I have to give up to make an auto stays constant. And so what we learned was to solve for how many wheat I have to give up to get an auto, or how many autos I have to give up to get a bushel of wheat. We can just put those two things equal. 60 W, 60 wheat, is essentially equal to 120 autos, because those are really two equivalent outputs that are possible for the United States. So that part we've seen before. And so what we do is we would say, okay, well, what is the opportunity cost of one automobile? What does that mean? Let's remind ourselves what that question means. The opportunity cost of producing one automobile is the amount of wheat I have to give up. That's what opportunity cost was. And so if I could have 60 W or equal 120 autos, what my question is what is the opportunity cost of one auto? So if you divide both sides by 120, you got the 1/2 bushel of wheat will give me one car. So every time I want to make another automobile, I have to give up 1/2 bushel of wheat if I'm the United States. And that was the opportunity cost. What the book is adding, this book is adding, is a term called marginal rate of transformation. We didn't use that term, but all it is a fancy way of telling you the slope of the line, and the slope of the line is how many bushels of wheat you give up in order to get autos. Because look at my arrow, you go down this amount of wheat, that's what you lose, in order to go over or increase the number of autos. And so we call that the marginal rate of transformation. So the marginal rate of transformation is how many of the vertical axis unit of goods you have to give up in order to get one more of the horizontal good. All right, and so you can see then with Canada, I'll try to speed up a little bit here. With Canada, they could go from 160 wheats to 80 autos. So every time they're going to make another auto, they have to give up 2 bushels of wheat. All right, so their marginal rate of transformation is 2W, 2 wheats, and the US is 1/2. All right, so that's what we've got so far. So moving on to step 3. We're going to think about what point each country will produce at. Now that's not something you can solve for, but you know for sure that if there's no trade, their production point is going to be somewhere on the production possibility frontier line, or if you remember, somewhere inside. Now we're not going to look at the inside points because that just means that you're being inefficient. So assuming both countries are being efficient, they're simply not trading at all, they're producing all the wheat and all the auto that they can also consume, then what that means is they're essentially trapped by their particular production possibility frontier. There's no way for them to get out here, and in the case of the United States, there's no way for them to have 40 bushels of wheat and more than 40 automobiles. They're trapped by this production possibility frontier. So anyway, just so you know, the actual points they're giving you here, they could have picked different points, but it seems reasonable that you would pick something fairly balanced between the two products, and that's kind of what they did. We see that Canada's took about half of their potential to make wheat and about half of, they did half and half. For us, for whatever reason, they picked a point that was skewed a little bit more towards wheat than cars. It's probably pretty accurate if you look around America. So, but the only thing I wanted to make a point of here is they could have picked different points. So there's nothing magical about that. We're just going to take it as given. And what we want to understand, though, this is important. Even though they're not trading, you could add up world production as defined by these two countries. And so if the US is making 40 bushels of wheat and Canada is making 80, then the world is doing 120 wheat. So we're going to come back to that when we get to the trading scenario. And then in the autos, you can add those two together, 40 autos by the US and 40 by Canada. So we, as a world, are making 80 autos and 120 wheat, with both countries producing and consuming only what they can do, right? So the production point is right here, and for US and here for Canada, it's also the consumption point because there is no trading. But that's not the best they can do. We know, we have seen that when a country specializes in the thing it has comparative advantage in, it can actually produce more in total. In other words, world production in autos and wheat can increase, and then that allows them, and that comes from specializing in the good that you can do at a lower opportunity cost. That's what comparative advantage was. All right, so just to remind us, for the US, if you wanted to know the comparative advantage that the US would have, we could start with the fact that we have already said that one automobile is costing the US 1/2 a bushel of wheat in terms of opportunity cost. In order to produce a car, we learned with the marginal rate of transformation, they had to give up 1/2 a bushel of wheat. So every car they produce has the opportunity cost of a 1/2 bushel of wheat, whereas when Canada produces a car, they're giving up 2. And so that's a sign that the United States has a comparative advantage in cars because they lose less wheat production when they specialize in cars. The lower opportunity cost is the comparative advantage by definition. So the US has comparative advantage in autos. Therefore, remember this, Canada has comparative advantage in wheat. You cannot have comparative advantage in both products. You can have absolute advantage in both products, not comparative advantage. You can take a moment now and try and solve for what is the opportunity cost of one wheat, not one car, but one wheat for the US. One wheat means, actually let me point this way, in order to make one more wheat, they have to give up 2 cars, whereas for Canada, in order to make one more wheat, they would have to give up, am I doing that right? Yeah, they'd have to give up half. So we see that the opportunity cost flips when we're looking at it the other way. And so Canada would have the lowest opportunity cost in producing wheat, and that gives them the comparative advantage in wheat. America would have the lowest opportunity cost in autos, and so they have the comparative advantage in autos. So all of this meant, when we learned about this previously, is that you should specialize in the good that you have the lowest opportunity cost. You're losing the least when you make that good, when the US makes automobiles, and Canada loses the least when they specialize in wheat, and that will allow total output to be higher. Okay, so do we have any more here? Let's see, with complete specialization. Okay, and so when we're doing this very basic case, we solve for who has comparative advantage. Remember A and A prime were the non-trading production consumption points. What we're saying with a comparative advantage is the United States is going to specialize in the good that they have the lowest opportunity cost, the good they have the comparative advantage, and they're going to specialize in automobiles. And so this point B becomes their production point. They're actually going to produce 120 automobiles and 0 wheat, whereas Canada has the opportunity cost, or excuse me, the comparative advantage in wheat. So they produce all wheat, no automobiles. And so now we have these production points, B prime and B. Not very good for consumption, but that's where trade comes in. So with them specializing like that, let's just take a moment and think about what this has done to world production, all right? Okay, so we're back here. At A, before they were trading, there was 40 wheat made by the US and 80 by Canada, so there was 120 being made in the world. With specialization, there's now 160. Okay, so look at automobiles. Before there was specialization, there was 40 autos by the US and 40 by Canada. That's a total of 80. With specialization, there's now 120. So we have 40 more bushels of wheat being made, and we have 40 more autos being made as a world supply. And so that's where we're going to be able to do trading and get consumption beyond the production we could have done all by ourselves. All right, moving on. So the other thing I want to really point out whenever you're looking at one of these little stories is the terms of trade, what you could consider a price. It's not a price because it's not in money, but it's how many units of wheat do you pay essentially to get an automobile, or vice versa. And you can never solve for this completely. You can predict where the range will be, but it's actually dependent on how strong the two countries are in negotiation. All right, so what we can say is that with the US's production possibility frontier, an automobile costs them half a bushel of wheat, and to Canada it costs 2 wheats, right? So there's like a range there where if the US was willing to sell to Canada, they're going to sell an automobile to Canada, they're not going to do it for less than half a wheat because that's what it costs them. But at the same time, Canada will be willing to pay up to 2 things of wheat, because if it's more than that, they'll just make it themselves. So there's this range then between half a bushel of wheat and 2 bushels of wheat where each country is better off, with the US selling cars to Canada and Canada selling wheat to the US. So that's basically what's happening here. So given that basic idea, we see that the book has decided that they negotiated 1 wheat equals 1 auto. So we're going to take that as given. And so then the other thing they've done here is you still have these production possibility frontiers. They have not changed. That is what is constraining each country. But we see their production points are going to be B and B prime. And then for each country, they're going to sell what they have produced in exchange for the other good. And so what they're saying is you can essentially draw in a new line that they are calling the trading possibilities line. So given that the US has got 120 autos, they can send one auto and get a bushel of wheat, one auto and get another bushel, because that was the terms of trade we simply assumed. And so ultimately they're going to say that ultimately they're going to be willing to export autos. The US will export autos up to the point where they don't have fewer autos that they would have had with no trade. All right. So before trading was an option, they had 40 autos. Now we've got 120. So we're willing to export up to 80 in order to get enough wheat to be better off than we would have been before. Without trade, we would have had 40 wheats. So if we can focus on producing automobiles and then send some of them to Canada and get their wheat, and our final combination of automobiles and wheat is higher than the 40-40 that we would have done on our own, then this is a good deal. And so that's basically what they're showing you here in this exercise. So we are going to assume that the United States can send 60. They're going to send 60 automobiles. So we're going to produce at B. We're going to sell 60. And that means we're going to get to keep 60. And because the terms of a trade was assumed to be 1-to-1, then every one of those automobiles brings us in exactly 60 wheat. So our final consumption point is 60 wheat, 60 automobiles, which you can clearly see is better than the original of 40 and 40. And so that's the power of specialization and trade, which allows us to expand or get to a point like C, which is not one we can do just by our ability to produce. Okay. So over in Canada's world, they are producing 160 wheats. They're going to send wheat to us, and 1 bushel of wheat to us for every 1 car, until it looks like they're going to, well, of course, we know they're going to send us the 60 wheat because we're going to sell 60 cars to get 60 wheat. So where do we get the 60 wheat from? From Canada. So they sell us the 60, leaving them with 100. And then, of course, the 60 wheat bought them 60 cars. And again, you can see their C prime is so much better than A. So Canada has ended up with specialization in trade with an additional 20 wheat, an additional 20 auto. The United States has ended up, we're just comparing the original non-trade consumption point to the final trading consumption point. We also have an additional 20 in autos and 20 in wheat. All right, so final takeaway is both countries are better off if they specialize in the good that they have the comparative advantage in. It allows total world production to be higher so that when you start selling the good you specialize in trade for the other one, you're able to land on a consumption point, which is represented by the C and the C prime, that is beyond your PPF, so you are unequivocally better off.